Okay, I've anchored my thread and I'm ready to stitch the second half. Now, this is where it gets a little bit tricky. So this first stitch is going to be in the same shared holes as the first stitch with the first half. And I'm going to keep this a little bit loose so that I can see where I'm supposed to put my needle down, and then I will tighten up this stitch once I've got my needle inserted and ready to tighten up on me. There you go. Oh, got a little knot. Let's see if we can get this out. Okay. Now I'm ready for the next stitch, and so I'm going to very carefully use my needle to see where I'm supposed to put the thread down, and I'm going to keep this a little bit loose until I'm ready to end the stitch. Because at this point I've got a beautiful half a heart, and I don't want to have the second half not match it. And I think that I missed the hole right there. So let's try that again. I'm trying to keep my head out of the camera shot instead of getting my head right over it to where I can see it better. Okay, that's it. This time I started with about 40 inches of thread because the 56 I started with for the first half was just way too much. Okay, so this is going to be my sixth stitch. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Now what happens if you're stitching along and you realize that you missed a hole? A lot of times you can fudge it by just putting another stitch in the same hole instead of pulling the whole thing out. I've done that. I'd rather get it all right to begin with, but you know, counting things happen, and there's an awful lot of thread going on here, and it's difficult to see, especially because I can't get my head directly over it. Now I think I'm in the same hole. Let's just pull this apart a little bit. I skipped a hole right there, so I'm going to go back to there. This is early enough that I can go back and make up for my mistake. Okay, that's all correct. I'm not looking at the stitch numbers. I'm just looking at what's on my canvas. It's easier to stitch if you just look at the end points and know that all of the stitches are going to end in adjacent holes coming up the center line. And that way you don't have to shift your focus back and forth between the book and the canvas. You can stitch a little bit faster and you usually make fewer mistakes. If I could get my head directly over what I'm looking at, I would be making fewer mistakes. Now here's a check for yourself. This stitch that is the bottom of the 4 is going to be a straight stitch. It's going to go straight across. So if you get to this point and you realize that this stitch is not coming straight across, you may want to go back and check and see, did you miss something? Now, I recommend starting and stopping with pin stitches because the stitches on the back of the canvas are very loose and will not give you a good place to weave into. So a pin stitch is going to be much more secure. And now I'm wondering if 40 inches was not quite enough. We'll see. It's easy enough to start and stop with this, and if I have to, I will. Okay, now we're going to start coming back down. Okay, it looks like I can get one more stitch, but I still have 2 stitches to go. So I will end this off with a pin stitch, and I'll start a new little length just to make sure that I can finish this properly. Don't want to split these threads as I'm making my pin stitch. I prefer stitching with one length if I can, but it doesn't hurt anything if you have to start and stop. The only thing that I like to try to do it all in one length so that I don't have as many anchor points under the stitch. The more anchor points you have, the more likelihood that you could have something show through. And we don't want those pin stitches to show through. Okay, let me clip this off. Anchor a new piece and finish this up. I do all of my pin stitches from the front because that way I can see where I'm going and it's easier. I can make sure that I don't split any threads. You can move the threads aside and then move them back in place. It won't hurt anything. There is a little bit of give in the stitches so that you can do that. My scissors are not exactly sharp. Okay, so now let's finish this up. We'll take this back down through the canvas and bring this up here. Okay, so here's my Amadeus heart. I will end this thread with a pin stitch, and I will stitch the remaining 3 sets of Amadeus hearts. If you have trouble flipping and stitching to the side, just turn your canvas so that you're always stitching the one on the top, and that way you won't get confused. I'll be back after I finish the other 3.